Welcome to episode 2 of JavaScript Patterns Book Club here at Hashrocket. With me as always is Shane Riley, JavaScript extraordinaire, and a somewhat underwhelming smattering of other Hashrocket people.
Excuse me?
Just
no, as far as quantity,
yes.
not quality.
Yes, a high quality but underwhelming smattering. A high quality smattering. The best smattering. Alright, so last time we left off on the toward the end of chapter 2, so we're going to go ahead and finish up chapter 2, starting on page 28, naming conventions. This one's pretty basic. It'll be a nice warm-up for a bunch of more complicated stuff later on. Naming conventions, you should be... oh no, I had my mouse pointer focused on the page management instead of the actual page.
Page 28.
That was the digital equivalent of dropping the book on the floor. Alright, naming conventions. Things you probably should be doing already, but I'm glad that someone's put it into print. Capitalized constructors, which is a function invoked with the new keyword, so you should be capitalizing those. For constructors, you use upper camel case. For function and method names, use lower camel case. Variables that are not functions, you should underscore the words. It just helps. There's no JavaScript, functionality reason to do this other than it makes your code easier to read. It helps you visually distinguish between functions and primitives and objects. ECMA script uses camel case for both methods and properties. I guess he just threw that in there as a fun fact. I don't think that should affect anything. And mainly because multi-word property names are rare. But were you going to say something?
Well, no, he was just mentioning it because he says, use underscores for your property names. However, you're going to encounter ones that are camel cased. Really, you're going to encounter everything if you deal with other people's code, but... Yeah. So that rule is not a JavaScript rule, it's just a good one to apply to your own code. Other naming patterns, he's got this example of a way to visually set apart functions that are intended to be private, or methods, or properties that are intended to be private. It doesn't actually do anything, it just helps people see what methods are supposed to not be accessed externally. Some people use 1 underscore for protected and 2 for private properties. Firefox throws underscores all over the place, which is great, I guess. Double underscore before and after. Again,
this just helps readability with your code, so instead of putting in a comment that says private, you could just put 2 underscores at the beginning of the method,
and hopefully people have read this book and know what that means.
Yeah, and hopefully people have read this book and know what it means. I think it's a great idea. I kind of wish that it actually caused some functionality to take place. But
well, if you have gone through and looked at source code of larger libraries like jQuery and Dojo and things like Raphael, they use the same sort of convention. So people that have actually dug into some heavy JavaScript are used to seeing that.
Alright, so that's your naming conventions. Use underscores for variables and camel case for methods. Writing comments. Some of you out there may be aware that we here at Hashrocket don't write comments. We don't believe in comments. The justification being that if your code requires comments, then your code is not readable enough on its own. Your code should be self-documenting in the sense that it makes sense. For example, I mean, a lot of designers out there, I don't know if there's anybody listening who does any CSS, a lot of designers like writing really cute section headers and stuff for their style sheets, like / header items, and it looks all fancy. Well, Tim Pope is dying. That is a thing that really happens.
No, I've seen plenty of it.
I mean, I know designers that will put an outline of the style sheet at the top of the style sheet.
Oh yeah, and break it into sections.
and break it into sections and stuff. That is charming, but like realistically, if you have a header, then it should be a header element, and you should be able to tell it's a header element because it has the word header in it. And if you want to find it, instead of acting like you're writing a giant game fax for Chrono Trigger and putting a
Oh yeah,
outline.
putting a quick search.
Yeah, a quick search thing at the top, just someone will control F for the word header and they will find your
Or
find
they'll
your
use a
styles.
modern browser and inspect
Yes.
the element and they'll be able to see all the
Yes,
properties.
or you could just inspect it.
Yeah.
I mean, these are habits that a lot of people have, and a lot of designers like aesthetically pleasing style sheets like that, but they're really only aesthetically pleasing for designers. Anyway, that's somewhat of a tangent, and it's me being mean, because a lot of my friends do that. But for JavaScript, I mean, I think JavaScript is a lot less clear than CSS when it comes to writing code, but the way that we sort of approach it is it just requires that your code be properly written. Like your function should explain what the function is doing. You shouldn't write things in obtuse ways. You should try to be as clear as you can. All of our functions we try to keep, like if your function's bleeding to like 50 lines, then you probably need to break it down a little bit. You shouldn't have monster functions floating around. And if it's DOM manipulation stuff, you should be accessing that DOM element in a way that makes it clear what you're doing and how you're attaching the thing.
And having arguments to your functions actually have names that
Yeah,
that tell you what you're supposed to pass instead of like A comma B comma C.
yes. No, yeah, so single letter variables only good for like a for statement or something.
Generic ones like OBJ and data and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Tell me that programming JavaScript is kind of like programming.
Yes.
yes, it
Well,
is.
he's telling us to.
Well, I'm
to
saying
go
this is
comment
all
heavy.
for the benefit of people out there who aren't Hashrocket, because I mean, all of the Ruby guys here don't write comments, and we don't write comments for JavaScript either. However, if you are interested in it, and especially if you're writing a plugin or something, it's really not a bad thing to do. There's a generous section in the book on writing API docs and using YUI doc to generate all that stuff, which is fine. It's kind of interesting. Definitely could be really useful depending on the use case of what you're doing. Obviously, an API doc is only good if you're writing a plugin. If you're us and you're mostly writing functionality to manipulate something with asynchronously or just doing some DOM manipulation or stuff specific to a project, then it doesn't apply. But yeah,
So read that if you're into it.
yeah. If,
We're gonna skip over
if
it.
that's what you're into, go for it. There's a writing to be read section, which is very nice. Except for this part, which is also something that we don't really believe in, and I would encourage other people to at least challenge their notions here, which is the idea of planning to throw one away on page 35, about 4 paragraphs down. The author suggests this idea of planning to throw your first pass at code away. I know that the Ruby guys believe in not throwing away any code, and ever. Well, planning to write quality code the first time, I think, is really important, and I don't think that. I mean, I personally,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess you don't want to go too far either way. I mean, you definitely don't want to skip the refactor step either. You know, like if
Well, no, yeah, but refactoring.
you're probably not going to write it right the first time.
Right. Well, that's sort of the trick here. Is he seems to encourage you to just write something that works the first time, and the idea is that the first solution you should come up with should be thrown away, and then you start from scratch, is a little bit scary. I mean, I've seen a lot of JavaScript code, even some that we've run into with this job, that was written like that and was just never addressed again, because unfortunately, especially in agile programming, if the feature is done, you mark it as done, and you probably won't come back to it. And there's a huge difference between refactoring something and just making something that's good better, and then making something that's like heinous because you're just trying to get it to work, and then your refactor is like making it decent. Don't do that. I personally am sort of rubbed the wrong way by the way that he presents it in this paragraph.
Yeah, he kind of he presents it as being something that happens on a regular basis with front end development. Like, oh well, you're presented this functionality and you're given a deadline of yesterday to do it.
Yeah. He does talk a lot about that, about like if you have no time, then maybe you have to do this. But
That's a different problem. You need
Yeah.
to address that differently.
yeah,
You know?
you shouldn't be solving a problem of not having enough time by writing things badly. That's a that is it's a non-solution. And I guess another reason this really gets to me is coming from style sheets. You absolutely can't write CSS in a temporary way because everything is so inherited by everything else. That if you go in just planning to make it all work and you go to refactor, there's really only one way to refactor a significant amount of CSS, and that's to throw it all away and start over. And especially when you get to larger sites, that becomes an exceedingly impractical thing to do. And so in order to save this much time on the front end, you've just made your life 1,000 times more complicated later. Or you've made a site that's never good because it can never be fixed. So I believe I've made that sound dire enough. You really shouldn't do that. You should probably write good code the first time. And then refactor to make your code even better once you are done and understand what you've done. Peer reviews, this is good. It's also, we do that in a formalized way for Ruby with pair programming. And even though Shane and I don't pair, we are always in the same room. So we oftentimes will review, turn our head around and talk to the other person about something.
That's not totally true. I mean, you guys, like, if we're working on a feature that has JavaScript in it, I'll often come over and get you, and you and I will pair on it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. We will pair with Ruby developers, but as far as the two of us pairing on the same JavaScript, we don't normally do that. So.
There will be times when, it's fairly common, one of us will be like, or it's usually me, will be like, is the way I'm doing this the most efficient way? Maybe there's another way to pull this off. And then if it's Shane, it's usually like, check out this thing I managed to do in one line.
Check out this craziness that you should never do because it's bad syntax.
Yeah, and then he'll not do that, hopefully. But first draft. I appreciate the end of page 35. Encourages you to open source at least a part of your code or simply blog about an interesting piece of it, even if you're a one-person shop and don't have any peers to review your code. Because if you're a designer out there who is in a situation where the people who you work for don't understand what a front-end developer is and why you might need one or why you might need someone else to help you, I feel I was there. And that can oftentimes lead to your code getting more and more idiosyncratic as you do more of it by yourself in a vacuum. And I know, a lot of designers are and I don't know about front-end developers. I'm coming from a designer who does front-end's point of view, but you tend to be kind of shy about code, especially JavaScript, and we feel weird about putting it out there and running it in front of someone else, but don't be. I like that he's encouraging you to open source part of your code or just blog about a thing that you did and look for feedback and start a conversation with somebody, because it's always in your best interest to be learning. So book club and peer review is your two best ways to learn JavaScript. There you go. So there's a section about minifying. It's minifying. Go ahead and run your code through a minifier if you feel the need to do so.
He doesn't mention Dean Edwards Packer, which I thought was weird.
Dean Edwards Packer, is that what you said?
Yeah. If you go to jscompress.com, it's got two methods of compressing JavaScript, and I've gotten the best results from Packer. It might just be the way that we write JavaScript that it comes out the most compressed with that, but just weird that he didn't mention it.
Yeah. And so the Google Closure compiler, he does have a side note about it attempting to minify global variables as well, which is risky and requires some attention and discipline on your end, etc., etc. There are definitely multiple levels of minifying something, some that aren't as brutal as others, and you probably don't need any at all, but if you feel the need to cut down a little bit and increase some performance, there are, just some white space tools, and then there's crazy stuff like Google Closure compiler. So, JSLint, we talked about that last week a little bit. There's a pretty good text-mix bundle that will run JSLint whenever you save the file that I use that's really nice.
That you're interested in.
Huh?
no one other than the two of us use
Oh, yeah.
TextMate here,
So
so
it-
it's
Yeah, that's really only of interest to me.
People on the internet use TextMate.
yeah.
Internet
Yeah.
people.
Internet people out there with TextMate.
There's also a Vim plugin.
There's also a Vim plugin. JS
Vim
Links,
has plugins?
convenient.
It's fantastic.
And there's the summary, and we're not going to do it because that would involve going back in the last week, and we've got to plug ahead because it's already 12:30. So chapter 3, literals and constructors. So, spoiler alert, constructors are bad almost all the time. That's basically going to be what today is about, is the different ways that constructors are bad and literals are good. So now you can go ahead and leave the stream. We don't have anything more to tell you. So here's an object literal, page 39. Hopefully this looks familiar to you if you have done any JavaScript at all. You should always use an object literal notation, just empty brackets. You can add a property, you can add a method, you can do all of that in one fell swoop, like on page 40. So the one catch here is that it's important to understand that for simplicity, the idea of an empty object is he's just saying that for simplicity's sake. There's no such thing as an empty object. As soon as you declare an object literal, you inherit all of the properties and methods from the object prototype. So the empty just means it has no additional properties other than the inherited prototype ones. So there's the object literal syntax. Again, hopefully that you have done this in some language, because it's essentially an associative array. So the literal emphasizes that, that objects are simply mutable hashes and not something that needs to be baked from a class. So it just helps to remind you that an object is in JavaScript is just a hash. It's just an associative array. Now he spends a significant amount of time explaining why you shouldn't use the object constructor. Because when you pass things to new object, your objects might be created by a different constructor based on what JavaScript thinks your item is. So if you pass in a string to new object, the constructor is actually going to be a string rather than an object. And if you pass in a boolean, it's going to use the boolean constructor, and so on. So you might not be making an object when you say new object. So you shouldn't do that. So there you go. And that actually makes sense. I mean, if you say new object true, what is true even associating with? Because an object is a hash, like a proper object is a hash, so it would just be this true value floating out in the middle of nowhere. So JavaScript is doing the proper thing when it's doing that, but you just need to be aware of the fact that when you say new object true, you don't get a new object, you get a boolean. It's trying to help you out. Excuse me, the custom constructor functions, the newly created object referenced by this is returned implicitly with a new constructor if no other object is returned explicitly. There's some weird behavior with that we'll get into in a minute. So I appreciate at the top of page 43 is really nice. He basically shows what is actually happening behind the scenes when you create a new a constructor. So JavaScript creates essentially a new object literal and then attaches properties to it and returns it. So I think that should help clear up a little bit what actually is going on when you do that. Now, the result is that anytime you call the new person in this example, a new function is created in memory. So you're copying functions. This is obviously inefficient because the say method doesn't change from one instance to the next. The better option is to add the method to the prototype of person. So there you go, add it to the prototype. And then when you make a new one, it's just going to inherit the prototype's function instead of making a new copy of the function. Excuse me. A lot of this is JavaScript specific. There are obviously cases in jQuery where this never even is an issue because you're attaching a click event to a DOM element or something like that. And in that case, you're not dealing with the prototypes at all. But with formal JavaScript programming, prototypes are really important for this reason. So reusable members such as methods should always attach to the prototype. Whoops. And he leaves a little teaser here to discuss what object create means later in the book, and I don't think that's in this chapter, so.
No, that's in like 5,
Yeah.
chapter 5, I think.
So yes, the object.create is explained further in chapter 5, which is entitled Object Creation Patterns.
There you
So,
go.
yeah, something to look forward to. So you can return any other object of your choosing. So this is when it gets
But
kind
it
of
may not
weird.
actually get returned.
Huh?
It may not actually get
Yes. So in his example here, he's actually creating a new object and returning that, which means that this name is completely lost. And this is, I'm looking at the example on top of page 44.
returned.
So the object maker is actually making an entirely separate new object and returning that. So there is freedom there. You have the freedom to return any object to your constructors as long as it's an object. So attempting to return something that's not an object will not cause an error, but will simply be ignored, and the object referenced by this will be returned instead. So this isn't, I mean, he doesn't label this as an anti-pattern, but you really shouldn't be doing this anyway. It's just a really strange, roundabout way to create multiple ways for your code to screw up without you realizing it. So here you go, patterns for enforcing new. This is when the new object gets really strange. When you forget new, this inside your constructor function will point to the global object. In browsers, this will point to window. So if you forget to put new waffle on the front of your delicious waffle here,
The taste property.
your taste property within the waffle function will actually be attached to your global object, the window, which is, you know, a great way to screw up a whole lot of code real fast.
Yeah, if you want to see that in action, you could look at the window object on eBay.
Yeah.
They do a tremendous amount of that.
Generally speaking, go to any website that appears to be poorly designed and then look at global variables and window and stuff on the window object. And
Just
it'll
open
get-
up console and type window. And
Yeah, and
have
it'll go,
that.
and there'll be all this stuff that people have attached to window because of problems like this. And we talked a little bit about the cool things that you can do with global object last week with my cup code.
Did you tell
The cup
the further story of
The
the
cup
thrilling conclusion of the cup?
The thrilling conclusion of the cup is that the cup got made and delivered to my friend, and yet he now has a trophy that's a base with a cup and another cup on it, and it looks fantastic. Especially because they're two totally different types of cups that are like slightly different colors and slightly different sizes. So I don't know.
JavaScript hacking for the win.
Yes, JavaScript hacking for the win. Also, trophy construction for the win. I'm very impressed with whoever put that together.
They're like, I'll show this guy.
Yes. Oh man, I wish I had a picture of it. I don't know. Next week, if anyone is interested, I'll find a picture of the cup
Put
trophy.
it on Yammer, didn't you?
I think you put it
It's on Yammer. I don't want to have to find it right now.
Okay, everyone, just sign up for the Hashrocket Yammer,
Yeah.
There
and then
you
you
go.
can see it.
Hey, by the way, do we have any? Is anyone watching the chat room?
Oh, I haven't been.
Yeah, there's no questions yet.
Oh, okay. Well, we must be
Yay.
doing perfectly then.
We must be that boring.
Yeah. Sorry. So this is a pretty funny line, I thought. Right after this, the part about how it will unpredictably attach to the window object and just, you know, stuff will go haywire. This undesired behavior is addressed in ECMA script 5, and in strict mode, this will no longer point to the global object.
So look forward to that in 5 years.
Yeah. First of all, look forward to that in 5 years. Second of all, it says it's addressed and that it doesn't point to the global object, but it doesn't say where it points or how it will be addressed.
I guess it creates a new object for this.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, because that would still screw stuff up. It just would screw stuff up in a less weird way. I mean, it would be cool, I guess, if you called it, let's see, if you call it without new, maybe new becomes unnecessary. I don't know. They don't explain.
It gives different semantics to a function that starts with an uppercase letter. That doesn't sound.
Yeah, that
That
sounds
very
crazy.
weird.
I would almost rather screw up the way that it's screwing up now.
So
Unless they decide to make it so it actually throws an error. I don't see how else they would actually fix the situation.
Well, for it to throw an error, then you'd have to force a naming convention on those functions. that act
Yes,
as
they would
constructors
change it from a convention to a.
to a standard.
Yeah, change it from a misunderstanding and a convention to override it or to avoid it to a standard. I don't know. He doesn't explain how it's solved or anything, but like we talked about last week, strict mode exists in nowhere, so don't worry about it. So the simplest alternative is to use a naming convention and make it clear, and always remember to use new. There are a couple of options for making sure that you can't screw up your code with forgetting new. One is using that, which is like you showed earlier. You don't have to return the this. You could return a new object. So you could actually do that in your constructor. The problem with this pattern is that you lose the prototype link. So all the advantages of attaching things to the prototype go out the window in exchange for you not being able to screw up your constructor. So.
Well, I haven't tried it, but I'm pretty sure you could, instead of doing an object literal assigned to that, just do new waffle in that case.
Well, he gets the
Yeah, it's
second.
Oh, he does
Yeah.
that later.
So that's the better way to do it, and this is I guess the best reason to do this is if you're writing some sort of code that might be invoked by someone else, and you don't trust them to know how to use new properly. You can do a self-invoking constructor that just checks to see if this is an instance of waffle, and if it isn't, then it recursively calls itself with the new keyword on the front end. That's a pretty solid 3-line or 1 line if you want to make your brackets ugly. Quickie fix to make sure that this problem doesn't happen.
I think I'd sooner raise an exception than allow them just to abuse JavaScript horribly and compensate for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, like I said, if you are in a situation where you have maybe a team, or you're putting something out in which someone is using your constructor and you don't trust them and you don't want to deal with teaching them, which you should be dealing with teaching them. They should already have a copy of this book in the mail to arrive at their house with a bow on it. But if not, go ahead and throw this in there. I mean, it is a safety precaution, basically. So he also throws in this one other solution down here, and then tells you that you shouldn't use it. So there's that. It's this arguments.callee business. It's not allowed in the
Strict mode.
PCMA
Can't use it in strict mode.
Yes, our favorite strict mode, also known as non-existent mode. So limit its future use and also remove any instances should you find them in existing code. So he tells you about this option. He says it's general purpose, another general purpose way, and then tells you that it's so bad that not only should you not use it, you should purge your code of it. So really, really don't use it. It is poison. So that is object construction. That's probably the most complicated thing in this chapter. We might actually be going a little fast. The array literal is really straightforward, although he does, and a lot of this is important, like obviously you should use an array literal and create an array by using brackets, but it is important to understand why you shouldn't be using the array constructor. So let's look at some of the curiousness there. So when you pass a single number to the array constructor, if you say array, open paren, 5, close paren, it does not make an array with one object or one item that is integer of 5. It sets a length of an array. So a new array 5 or a new array 3 creates an array with a length of 3 but no actual elements. So you'll just walk through it and get undefined for 3 spots. Because it is a constructor. I mean, it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So here's the example of what happens there. It looks like those two things should be doing the same thing. They're totally not. One is new array 3. You got a length of 3, except that they're all undefined. And if you just put bracket 3, close bracket, length of 1, and it's 3. So it gets worse when you pass. This is actually pretty cool. If you pass a floating point number to new array, it results in a range error because I actually have a pretty severe problem with this. I don't know why JavaScript won't just check to see if it's an integer or not, and then
Do a math.floor.
yeah. I mean, it seems like either do a math.floor or just give you if you pass a string to new array, it'll give you an array with one element that is that string. So if you pass a float, it should give you one element with a float in it. Like the fact that JavaScript doesn't check to see, it just checks to see if it's a number, it doesn't check to see if it's an integer. And then if it's not a float, it throws an error because it can't make an array with 3.14 elements in it. So just don't do that. And then if you want to be annoying, you can do this little trick that he shows here, this var white equals new array 256.join space.
Instead of writing a for loop.
Instead of writing for loop, I mean, that's basically the ugly JavaScript equivalent of, in Ruby, the like 5.times do something that'll just, because there's a times function on a number.
Wait, you don't like that?
No, I do like that in Ruby, but in
This is the ugly JavaScript
the ugly
equivalent. not
JavaScript
the ugly
equivalent is-
JavaScript equivalent.
yes.
Alright.
Yes, my modifier may have been misplaced. And so, he leaves it to the curious reader, and we're all curious here. The curious reader as to why new array 256 in parentheses and then joined by spaces returns a string with 255 white spaces. Anyone?
Fence post error!
What?
You got 256 fence posts, there's 225
gotcha.
segments joining them.
Oh, okay, awesome. I
So
didn't
you
know
got
there
So
was-
everything was true
Lines,
except the
white
error
space,
part. I just said that.
space.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I never called them fence posts, but that's cool. I'm glad there's a name for that.
That's what happens when you're actually educated in computer science.
Oh,
You pick up those things. We have no idea,
right.
of course.
All right. Well, yes,
Like
it's
the
because.
turtles thing, turtles all the way down.
Oh man, I know about
Fence
that.
posts all the way down.
Fence posts,
Had no
almost
idea.
all the way down. Yes, so it's because you're actually counting the space in between the cells, not the actual cells. But in any case, dude, if you need 255 white spaces, there are probably better ways to get them. Check for arrayness. So this is, a really fun part of JavaScript, which is that an array is just an object with some special capabilities. So he talks about how to find out whether something is an array. Because normally, if you just run type of on an array, it'll tell you it's an object. So ECMAScript 5 has an actual isArray method, but I don't believe, I have the support thing up here, and I don't believe a lot of browsers actually handle isArray properly. According to this table that I have, IE8 does not handle isArray. Anything before Firefox 4 and Safari 5 don't handle isArray. So at least for now, that's not a safe bet if you've got to find out something is an array.
That's the same sort of thing as using the new for each method instead of the for this in this object. You could do it in modern browsers, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, let me just say that the IE8 column on this website is real red. A lot of stuff not supported.
Has anyone
So-
created like a plugin or anything that just backports all these features that you can include in your project so
Does
you have safety across
Modernizer
browsers?
do this one?
isArray? I don't know. I haven't looked at Modernizer that much. I mean, jQuery's got a method to do that, but I think every JavaScript library has a method to check for
Yeah.
arrayness.
Yeah, I don't see anything for Modernizer. Modernizer is an option that's Modernizer without an E. We don't use it here. It does give you a bunch of functionality that you might not otherwise get in
It still
older
has an
browsers.
E, it's the second E.
Yes, it only has one E. Sorry, it does not have the penultimate E is removed because it's on the internet and you're not allowed to use ER on anything anymore. So that's an option. I'm pretty sure it has one like Shane said, jQuery has one. But in order to understand what's actually going on, we'll go ahead and look at how you can find it out for yourself without using a library. So you can actually run a prototype to string method, and it will return the string object array. If it's an object, it should return the string object. So you can actually basically implement an isArray function for yourself in a couple of lines. That's one way of doing it. I thought that he talked about, what is it, split? Isn't there a special array function? No, I guess he doesn't talk about
Well, you could technically
it. You can test for the
add onto
existence
the
of
object prototype a method called split, and then you can't check for the instance of that and assume it's an array.
because that was what he talked about in the good parts.
I think so.
Yeah, so there is another way that's not as trustworthy where you can actually look for a split, which is an actual method that JavaScript only applies to an array object, but that falls apart if there happens to be an unrelated method called split that's already been attached to the object prototype. So don't worry about
or
that.
even the object itself. I mean, if you just
Yeah, or the object, yeah, anything. So, I mean, that's pretty clean though. If you're in a situation where you have to make sure something's an array, there you go. Moving on, JSON. JSON's cool. It's just an object. It's object notation, except the keys have to be in quotes. In JSON strings, you cannot use functions or regex literals, which Shane ran into.
I made something where you could, but it's
You're not
dirty.
supposed to.
It's not
Yeah.
called
It's
JSON.
very dirty. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not JSON anymore.
Basically, he was trying to do some HTML5 local storage and be able to store things locally that were objects that had methods on them. And yeah, you can't do that because the methods just end up not being attached. So you can convert them. You can stringify the methods and then eval them coming back in, but again, really dirty. Don't do
Yeah,
that.
at first I ran it through an eval, but then looking at what jQuery does when you run get script, I mean it's effectively doing the same thing. It's parsing a JavaScript file as a string and then doing something with it so that you have access to it. What it does is prepend a new script tag and then loads the contents into it in the head of the document. And somehow that's supposed to be better than eval. I don't know why, but
Yeah, so JSON doesn't take functions. It just converts everything to string, and HTML5 local storage is JSON. So that's that.
oh, not even. It's just
Not
strings.
even JSON.
So you have a
What
local
is it,
storage
just strings?
object,
Okay.
an object that has, you can assign it properties, but the properties can only have a value that can be converted to a string. So if you assign it an object literal, it converts it to object in brackets.
Awesome. So sub JSON, HTML5 local storage is not even JSON. But that's neither here nor there at the moment. Working with JSON, no matter what library you're using, it probably has a JSON parser. jQuery has one, YUI has one, etc. Regular expressions. You should probably use a regular expression literal. I hope you're sensing the pattern that I alluded to at the beginning of this book club episode, which is don't use these constructors, especially regular expressions, because it becomes totally insane, as if regular expressions weren't annoying enough as it is. You have to double escape backslashes. So you can end up in a situation where you have like 4, 6, a million backslashes in a row, and it makes your regular expression really annoying.
I don't know if he mentions it in there, but if you use the new regular expression constructor rather than a regular expression literal, you get multiple instances
Yeah.
of the same regular expression.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second, because that one's
Okay.
that's pretty awesome too. And by awesome, I mean not awesome. So here's the literal syntax. You append something between forward slashes. So if you create the same regular expression in a loop, the previously created object will be returned with all of its properties already set from the first time. So you run a regular expression literal, and it keeps the same object.
Yeah,
Right,
so
yes.
if you assign another variable to that same regular expression pattern, it's not creating a duplicate of that regular expression pattern in memory, it's referencing the same pattern that's already there.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that could be a reason to use a new regular expression to make sure that you're getting a clean one in a particular situation. Excuse me, because it's created at runtime, rather than reuse from the last time it was used.
Yeah, and there's a note that says that ECMA script 5 creates new ones. But,
Yeah.
you know.
So the behavior has been corrected in many browser environments, and that's a horrible thing to hear whenever you're dealing with anything that's client-side, because you want to hear all or none, you don't want to hear many. So it's not to be relied on. So if you're in a situation where you're reusing a regular expression in a loop, create a new one. Otherwise, don't. So I guess this is not as strict, don't use the constructor as some other stuff, but probably don't use the constructor. And one last note, which is real fun, is calling regex without new behaves the same as with new.
Consistencies.
Consistency is JavaScript's highest achievement. You'd probably use new because it makes it clear that you're making a new one. Just, that's what I would say. Primitive wrappers, and this sort of, I believe we're about to the end of the chapter.
Yeah, I don't know if we go into date.
Oh yeah, he mentions date in passing at the very end.
Okay.
Primitive wrappers, you probably wouldn't ever use these anyway, but he does explain why you shouldn't be doing so.
The number one is especially amusing.
Yes, so, which part are you talking about?
Oh, just that you got some properties on there that you normally wouldn't have just by setting a variable to a number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's, avoid saying new string, my string. Primitives are not objects, they can't be augmented with properties, which the behavior that what happens when when you try to do that is funny. So you make a primitive, this is on page 53. You make a primitive string, you run split on it, it temporarily converts it to an object in order to use the split method, but it doesn't permanently do so. So then if you try to add a attribute of smile to greet, it doesn't give you an error, but it won't actually do anything. So the way that it runs functions attaching to primitives is to temporarily convert them to the associated object, but it doesn't actually permanently change the variable. So the way around this is just to not try to do that. Create primitives and use them, and understand that the difference between having a primitive and having an object with a, maybe in this case you have an object of greeting, and then you have an attribute of greet, and that's where your string is, and it isn't, and it's contained within the object, or something like that. So when used without new, wrapper constructors convert the argument passed to them to a primitive value. So type of number 1 is number, type of number 1 in quotes is also a number, type of number new number is number, type of string 1 is a string, type of boolean 1 is boolean. So no matter what you're passing in there, it's going to try to convert it to a primitive value. Just don't use any of them, and then you don't even have to worry about it. Oh, okay, 3 minutes. Perfect.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. All right, so here's the error handling. I didn't mark up anything in here. He doesn't spend very much time on it. There's a bunch of built-in error constructors, but there's also try and catch blocks. So he basically says use those, avoid the error constructors. Usually if you're writing client-side JavaScript, you shouldn't really be throwing any errors, hopefully.
Well, depends.
Yeah.
If you're
You
writing straight
constructor.
JavaScript for someone else to use, then it might be helpful so
Yes.
that they don't use it improperly.
So if you're writing plugins, go for it. But if you're writing client-side stuff, maybe not. In summary, avoid the following built-in constructors, all of them except for date. And he mentions date in the second to last sentence of the paragraph, and
Nice.
he doesn't talk about it at all. Date constructor will give you a date object, which you can do a whole bunch of stuff with.
It has a tremendous amount of properties on it.
Yes, a stunning amount of properties. And then there's a nice little table that gets its own page with built-in constructors to avoid and literals and primitives you prefer. And thus concludes chapter 3. This page intentionally left blank, I guess. What's this about? All right, I guess it's the left-hand page. Next week, chapter 4, functions. Be there.
Yeah.
Same
Are there
time,
any questions
same
in the
channel.
chat room or anything?
Any
Yeah, I
questions? No questions?
Oh.
All
Must
right.
have answered them all.
Yes, you're welcome, I guess.
4
Bye.
viewers. Bye, 4 viewers.